Have you ever wondered how close you've come to danger without even realizing it? At Shivering Vault, we take you there, one story at a time. But before you drift off, consider liking this video, commenting where you're watching from and at what time, and subscribing to keep these chilling stories coming. Now, let's dive into these unsettling tales. It was just supposed to be a regular night. I was used to the quiet. I'd worked as an au pair for a little over a year by then, and while the kids I cared for were a bit spoiled, they were generally well behaved. The family I worked for lived in a gorgeous, modern mansion up in the hills of Beverly Hills. The kind of house with sleek glass windows, shiny floors, and walls that seemed to stretch forever. It was beautiful. And it was big. Really big. So big that sometimes, especially at night, it felt a little lonely. It had been a long day. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Lily, the younger one, had gotten into a bit of trouble for drawing all over the walls with markers, as usual, and Max, her older brother, had been glued to his phone, barely paying attention. After I'd put them both to bed and settled them in, I finally had a moment to myself. The clock on the wall read 11:45 p.m. I was on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping on a mug of tea. The house was completely still. I could hear the occasional creak of the floorboards above me as I relaxed, but nothing else. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, their branches tapping softly against the large glass windows. I was just starting to drift into a half-sleep when I heard it, the doorbell. I blinked, startled, instantly wide awake. I glanced at the clock again, 11:45. The doorbell rang again. It wasn't the usual delivery guy at the front gate. I didn't have anything scheduled to arrive. I'd been monitoring the deliveries for the past few days and had made sure nothing was supposed to come that late. I pulled myself off the couch, leaving the blanket crumpled on the cushions. My footsteps echoed across the marble floor as I walked to the foyer, where the front door loomed. I felt a growing tension in the pit of my stomach, but I dismissed it as nerves. It was probably just a mistake. Maybe a neighbor had a package for the family and forgot to pick it up earlier. I approached the door and peered through the peephole. The man standing on the porch didn't look like anyone I knew. He was wearing a blue delivery uniform, holding a large box in his hands. He was standing under the light of the porch. His face was hard to make out in the dim light, but he looked older than the typical delivery driver, maybe in his 40s. His expression was polite but stiff, his eyes focused on the door, not on me. I instinctively checked my phone to make sure the package was actually coming from the right place. Nothing. No notification. I checked again. No alert. Weird. I hesitated. There was no reason for a delivery this late, but still, I didn't want to be rude. It was probably just a mistake. I took a deep breath and cracked the door open slightly, making sure the security chain was still latched. "Good evening, ma'am," the man said in a calm, even tone. "I have a package here for the residents. It's urgent. I need your signature right away." I blinked. "I didn't get any notice about a delivery," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Are you sure this is for this address?" The man smiled. "Yes, absolutely. It's for this address, ma'am. The note said it was very important. I was told to deliver it tonight. I promise it will only take a second." I hesitated again, trying to process the words. There was something off about this entire situation, but I couldn't put my finger on it. The way he was standing too close to the door, his eyes darting back and forth as if he was watching for something. The urgency in his tone didn't feel right. It wasn't the kind of urgency you'd expect from a simple delivery. Then I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. A second figure was moving along the side of the house, just barely visible in the shadows. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but I could see it clearly now. A man wearing a hoodie, his features hidden, was slowly creeping along the driveway, barely visible under the dim glow of the motion sensor lights. My throat tightened. I instinctively stepped back, my fingers tightening on the door handle, but I didn't shut it. "Can you just leave it by the door?" I said, my voice suddenly sounding very small. I'm not expecting anything. The delivery man's smile faltered just a bit, and for a split second his eyes flickered to something behind me, something off to the side of the house. I couldn't tell what he was looking at. "I'm afraid I can't do that, ma'am," he said, his voice now just a bit sharper. "I need a signature. It's urgent." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Something was wrong. I quickly glanced to the side again, my mind trying to make sense of the shadow I'd seen creeping along the driveway. But before I could react, I heard the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps coming from behind the door, a thud of a shoe against the floor. Someone was moving closer. And that's when I realized there was no package, no delivery. I was staring at a man who was trying to lure me out. The second figure wasn't just lurking outside. It was someone else, someone waiting for the right moment. My hand trembled as I slowly closed the door just a little more, but not quickly enough. The delivery man suddenly shoved his foot into the gap. It was the hardest I'd ever felt a door pushed against me. It was like he was ready for me to back down. I panicked. I jerked backward, trying to slam the door, but his foot stayed lodged between the frame and the door. He grunted, forcing his way in, his body blocking the small opening between us. I felt a flash of adrenaline surge through me, and my heart slammed in my chest as I tried desperately to push the door shut. I slammed the door into his arm again and again, but his grip only tightened. He was so much stronger than I'd expected. He shoved harder, and before I could think, I heard a snap. The security chain had come loose from the wall. I slammed the door back again. Hard. The edge of the door hit his arm, and he stumbled back. With one last push, I threw my body into the door and finally managed to shove it shut. I heard him curse loudly on the other side. My fingers fumbled with the lock, but I was shaking too hard. It was as if my whole body was trembling in panic, my hands working in slow motion. But somehow, I got the door bolted. I leaned against it, my chest heaving. I barely registered the muffled pounding coming from the windows and the side doors as I grabbed the phone. The 911 operator's voice was a distant sound in my ears, but I held it together long enough to explain what was happening. "Stay calm," she said, her voice soothing yet urgent. "Help is on the way." The house was still. My breath was loud in my ears, each intake feeling like it might be my last. I grabbed the kids. The terror I felt was a sharp, freezing cold that went right to my bones. I moved quickly up the stairs, my feet barely touching the steps. Every creak of the floorboards above sounded deafening in the quiet, and I clutched Lily and Max as I hurried to the master bedroom. We barricaded ourselves in. The pounding on the windows grew louder. They were trying everything. I couldn't even think straight, could barely catch my breath. I whispered over and over that everything would be fine, that help was on the way. But deep down, I wasn't sure. The sirens finally came. The sound of them seemed to shake the house itself. I could feel the distant rumble of the engines, and then, moments later, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. The men outside must have heard the sirens too, because I heard the frantic scrabble of feet as they bolted into the darkness. A few minutes later, police flooded the property. They moved like a swarm of bees, checking every corner of the house, every window, every door. I heard their voices. They spoke to each other. They found the tools, crowbars, screwdrivers, lockpicks, all scattered near the bushes by the driveway. It was clear now. The whole thing had been a planned attack, a ruse, a fake delivery. The men were caught before they could get away, and later the authorities told me that this wasn't just some random home invasion. It was part of a string of attacks in high-end neighborhoods. They had been using the fake delivery ruse to gain access to people's homes, to force their way in when the door was opened, to rob or hurt whoever was inside. It could have been so much worse. They were targeting people like me, people who were alone in these big, quiet houses. The relief was overwhelming, but the fear lingered. It always would. The wind always seemed to carry an odd silence through the outskirts of Sacramento, but tonight it was eerily still. I wasn't used to the quiet like this. The gas station where I worked stood at the edge of a stretch of highway, far from any real civilization. Just a couple of lonely lights hanging over the pumps, casting a weak glow on the cracked asphalt and the weeds pushing through the concrete. It was the kind of place you wouldn't even notice unless you needed gas. And even then, it wasn't the first place you'd pull into. I was 24, working the graveyard shift, midnight to 6 a.m. It paid well enough, and honestly, I didn't mind the solitude. The hours were long and the night dragged on, but there was something peaceful about it. That is, until that night. It was just after 2:30 a.m. when I heard the chime of the door, signaling someone's entrance. I barely glanced up from my phone. I was scrolling mindlessly, just trying to keep the minutes from crawling by. The place was quiet, save for the hum of the lights above and the occasional sound of wind rattling the loose door hinges. I knew it was going to be another slow night, just another one of those nights where I'd wait and hope for the hours to pass quickly. But this guy, he didn't fit the usual pattern of the occasional trucker or random night driver. I noticed him as soon as he stepped in. He walked in slowly and almost too slow. His boots made a soft thud on the tile floor, the sound too pronounced in the otherwise dead quiet. I kept my eyes down, trying to stay absorbed in my phone, but there was something about him that pulled my attention away. Maybe it was the way he kept his hands at his sides, too still, too controlled. Maybe it was his eyes, darting around, scanning the aisles, but every time he thought I wasn't looking, they flicked back to me. It made my skin crawl. He didn't seem to be in any real rush, just wandering the aisles like he was looking for something he couldn't quite find. He picked up a bottle of water, stared at it for a long moment, then placed it back with an almost unnatural deliberateness. Then he picked up a packet of gum, turned it over in his hands like he was trying to figure out what to do with it. But he didn't buy anything. The whole thing felt off. I tried to shake off the growing unease. It wasn't like I hadn't dealt with weird people before. I figured he was just one of those socially awkward types. But there was something more to it this time. I shifted my position slightly, trying to look busy behind the counter. My thumb brushed the screen of my phone under the counter, making sure my finger hovered over the emergency contacts. I didn't know why I felt so paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he approached the counter. He stood there for a moment, not speaking, just looking at me. His eyes were heavy, almost intense. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. "Can I help you with anything?" I asked, my voice coming out more steady than I felt. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "No," he said softly, "just looking around." The way he said it, with that odd emphasis, made my stomach tighten. I nodded, trying to smile politely, but he didn't seem to care about that. He just stood there, still, his eyes lingering on me a bit longer than they should have. The seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. I could hear the soft ticking of the clock on the wall behind me, the only other sound in the room besides my breathing and the occasional rustle of paper as he absent-mindedly touched the items on the counter. Then, without another word, he turned and wandered back into the aisles, moving in that slow, deliberate manner. He didn't buy anything. After what felt like an eternity, he made his way out the door, disappearing into the night. The chime of the door seemed too loud, like it was the only thing in the entire world making any sound. I let out a breath. The unease didn't leave, though. By the time my shift ended, Just after 3 a.m., I was ready to get out of there. The gas station was even quieter than usual. The parking lot was empty except for my car. The only other vehicle was a dark-colored truck parked at the far end of the lot, its engine idling. The headlights were off, and the truck was far enough away that I couldn't make out the driver. I stood in the doorway for a moment, my mind whirling. It had to be a coincidence, right? Maybe the guy was just waiting for a spot to park or something. But even as I told myself this, something in my gut twisted. I told myself to stop overthinking it. I started walking to my car, hands in my jacket pockets, trying to push the unease away. The truck sat there, unmoving, too far for me to see any details. It was strange, but I didn't want to get too paranoid. Maybe it was just someone who had pulled in for a break, like I had seen before. I got in my car, started the engine, and slowly pulled out of the parking lot. The headlights of the truck remained in the distance, watching, unmoving. As I turned onto the main road, my stomach churned again. I glanced into the rearview mirror. The truck was following me now, but it wasn't tailgating. It stayed far behind, headlights off, moving with a slow, deliberate pace that made my heart race even faster. My breath caught in my throat. I looked around, trying to think of what to do. Should I pull over and call someone? Should I speed up and lose them? My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, as I tried to control the panic creeping up my chest. I made a sharp turn onto a side road, praying the truck would keep its distance. But as I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw it. The truck didn't break pace. It mirrored my every move. If I turned, it turned. If I sped up, it sped up. The same distance was always between us, a shadow in the dark. The headlights remained off, and I could almost feel the driver's eyes on me. I pushed the pedal to the floor, trying to outrun it. The tires screeched against the asphalt as I took another turn, my hands shaking violently. My heart pounded so loud I could barely hear the engine roar beneath me. I wasn't sure how much time passed, but it felt like hours as I sped through the quiet streets, trying to shake the truck off my tail. Every turn felt like it was leading me into more darkness, and still that truck stayed behind me. Finally, I reached my street. My house was just ahead. I slammed my foot on the gas, making a sharp turn into my driveway, nearly clipping the curb as I pulled in. The truck didn't slow down. It stopped at the end of my driveway. It was so close now. So close I could make out the shape of the truck more clearly. I didn't care. My hands were shaking, my pulse racing, and the door was locked before I even had time to think. I ran to the front door, locking it behind me as quickly as possible. I didn't care about being quiet. My hands trembled as I tried to catch my breath, eyes darting from the window to the door. The truck was still there. I looked through the peephole. The man from the gas station was there. I froze. He was walking slowly toward my front door. My stomach dropped. I quickly pulled out my phone and dialed 911. My hands were shaking so much that it took me a moment to hit the call button. When the line connected, the dispatcher's calm voice came through, and it almost made me feel a bit more grounded. 911, what's your emergency? She asked. I tried to keep my voice steady, but it came out a little shaky. I'm being followed, I said, my breath catching. I was at a gas station earlier, and this guy, he followed me. I think he's at my house now. There was a short pause, then the dispatcher responded in a calm, professional tone. Okay, stay calm. Can you give me your address? I rattled off my address as quickly as I could. I wasn't sure how much time had passed since I'd seen the truck following me, but it felt like it was only a few minutes. He's here now. He's outside my door. I watched through the peephole as the man reached my front door. His hands were steady as he tested the door handle, his fingers brushing the cold metal. I held my breath. I was so scared I could barely speak. Then, with a chill that ran down my spine, I saw him pull something from his jacket. A tool. A Slim Jim. He was trying to force the lock. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my throat. He's trying to break in. The dispatcher remained calm. Stay on the line. Help is on the way. Stay inside. Lock everything. I watched him move, his silhouette now visible through the glass. He circled the house slowly, tapping at windows, looking for any way to get in. His movements were methodical, deliberate, as though he knew exactly what he was doing. I whispered, "Please hurry." Moments stretched on, dragging. My mind screamed for help, but all I could do was watch and wait. Then, suddenly, I heard it. The sound of sirens, flashing red and blue lights filled the street. The man saw the flashing lights too. He bolted toward the backyard, disappearing into the darkness. But it was too late. Officers were already on him. I could hear the sounds of them taking him down, the soft thud of boots against the ground, and then everything went quiet. A few minutes later, there was a knock at the door. I opened it carefully, still feeling the adrenaline coursing through me, but the officer who greeted me gave me a reassuring nod. "He's in custody. You're safe now." They told me later that the man had a knife on him and zip ties. It was a relief, but the whole thing left me rattled. I don't think I fully processed how close things had been until much later. I never worked the night shift again. My name's Ryan, and I'm a freelance software developer in my early 30s. I've been living in San Mateo, California for the past few years, in a small but cozy 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. It's the kind of neighborhood where everyone knows each other, and the streets are lined with neat little houses. The kind of place where nothing really happens, and the kind of place that makes you feel safe. Almost too safe, in a way. I'm a night owl by nature, which works well for my job. Most of my clients don't care when I work as long as I meet deadlines, so I often find myself pulling all-nighters. My routine was simple: wake up late, work through the night, get up around noon, and then start all over again. The night hours were peaceful. The world outside felt still, and my brain worked best when everything was quiet. There was something about the stillness that helped me focus. No cars honking, no loud kids playing, no neighbors mowing lawns. Just me, my desk, and my code. It was around 2:40 a.m. when I realized I had been working for hours without a break. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the exhaustion settle in behind them. My neck was stiff, and I could feel a slight headache starting to build. I needed to stretch my legs and get some water, so I stood up from my desk, stretching my back as I walked out of the room. The house was dead quiet, too quiet even. My footsteps echoed faintly against the hardwood floors as I made my way down the narrow hallway toward the kitchen. The only light was the faint glow from the street lamps outside, which filtered through the windows and made everything look a bit dimmer than usual. I passed the living room, glancing briefly at the window, but nothing stood out. Everything was normal. Then I heard it. A soft metallic clatter. It came from the direction of the garage. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe something had fallen off the workbench. I'd heard the wind rattle the garage door before, so I figured it was just the house settling, or maybe a squirrel or raccoon messing around outside. But then I heard it again, only this time it was a little different. It wasn't the kind of random noise I'd grown used to. It was deliberate, like something or someone was trying to make noise. I froze, standing still in the hallway, trying to pinpoint the sound. My breath caught in my chest. Was I imagining things? Maybe it was just my brain playing tricks on me from being so tired. But no, this time it was clear. It was the sound of something metallic scraping, something being moved, and then, unmistakably, the faint sound of a garage door being jostled. The garage door? I couldn't shake the unease. I tried to brush it off. It's nothing, I told myself. It's probably just the wind. But then, I heard it again. A cold shiver ran down my back, and I felt my stomach twist. I crept toward the door that led to the garage, each step making the floorboards groan beneath my feet. The hallway was nearly pitch black, but the sliver of moonlight outside illuminated the edges of the door just enough for me to see. I gently pushed the door open, just a crack, enough to peek through. My breath caught in my throat. Through the narrow gap, I saw a figure in the dim light, dressed in black, gloves on his hands, face obscured by a mask. He was hunched over, desperately trying to pry open the garage's side door with a crowbar. The metal scraped against the door with a high-pitched screech, and I could see his muscles straining as he worked the tool into the crack. My blood ran cold. I had to blink to make sure I wasn't imagining it, but the figure was still there, just inches away from breaking in. Someone was trying to force their way into my garage. I stepped back from the door, panic surging through me. What should I do? The questions screamed through my mind. I didn't waste any more time. I turned quickly. I dashed up the stairs, taking them two at a time. The house seemed unnervingly quiet as I made my way to the second floor. I could hear the sound of my own breath, harsh and shallow in the silence. I made a beeline for my office, the only room I could lock myself in. I grabbed the doorknob, twisting it with shaky hands, and slammed the door behind me, locking it quickly. I felt the weight of the silence again as I stood there in the dark, my body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm. There's someone in my garage, I whispered, my voice barely audible. They're trying to break in. Please, I need help. Stay on the line with me, the dispatcher said, her tone firm now. Give me your address. I recited the address in a voice that was shaky even to my own ears. Please, hurry, I added, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't sure if she could hear the panic creeping into my words, but I tried to keep it out of my voice as best I could. The dispatcher reassured me that officers were on the way and that I should remain quiet. The next few minutes felt like they were stretching out for hours. I could hear the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears, too loud, too frantic. I set the phone down, but I didn't dare move. I could hear faint sounds from the floor below. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Someone was inside the house. I froze, barely breathing. My pulse pounded in my temples. The sound of those footsteps grew louder, closer, until I could hear them coming up the stairs. I pressed myself against the wall, doing my best to stay hidden in the dark corner of the room. My mind raced, trying to think of what I could do. What should I do? I didn't have a gun or any real way of defending myself except for the metal desk lamp that I still clutched in my sweaty hand. The footsteps stopped just outside my office door. For a moment, there was complete silence, and I wondered if the intruder had heard me moving around. Maybe he was waiting for me to make a sound. I held my breath, praying my footsteps hadn't been too loud. The air felt thick, as if it were pressing in on me. Then came the sound I dreaded. The door handle rattled. I jumped, my heart leaping in my chest. The intruder was testing the door. He didn't stop there. Suddenly, I heard the sharp crack of wood as he slammed his body against the door. The whole frame shook, and I nearly lost my grip on the desk lamp. My stomach churned as the door buckled under the weight of his assault. Another slam. I backed further into the corner, trying to make myself as small as possible, but my body was trembling so hard that it felt like the whole room was shaking. The chair I'd shoved under the doorknob suddenly seemed like it wasn't enough to hold off. My thoughts raced. If he gets in, if he gets past the door, what do I do? I could hear the dispatcher's voice again, crackling in my ear. Stay calm, Ryan. Police are on their way. Stay quiet. They're almost there. I clutched the desk lamp so tightly that my fingers were numb, my breath shallow. I had no plan, no idea what I'd do if he got in. Another slam. Another hit against the door. The lock was starting to give. Just as I thought the door was going to give way completely, I saw a flash of light through the window. Red and blue lights. The faint hum of sirens cutting through the stillness of the night. Relief flooded through me, but I didn't dare move. The intruder didn't seem to notice the sirens or the flashing lights. He kept slamming against the door, each hit louder than the last. But then, the sound shifted. I heard him curse, muttering something I couldn't quite make out. Was he trying to escape? I heard a loud crash from downstairs, like a door being kicked in. Then there were voices, commands, shouting, the sound of boots pounding against the floor. The intruder's frantic movements became more desperate, but the noise of the officer's arrival drowned it out. I heard a struggle, followed by a heavy thud. Someone hit the floor hard. I could hear shouting downstairs, but my mind was only focused on the door. And then, finally, the knock came at my door. It was light, but firm. "Police, it's safe now." I opened the door slowly, my hand shaking, and found 2 officers standing there. One of them immediately checked on me, and I could see the concern in their eyes. I must have looked like a wreck. "We've got him," one of the officers said, his voice steady but with a hint of exhaustion. "He tried to run, but we caught him in the kitchen. He had a crowbar, zip ties, and duct tape." He paused for a moment, then added, "He wasn't here to rob you." I couldn't process what that meant. I just stood there, my legs shaking. It was then that it hit me. He hadn't come here to steal anything. He'd come here to do something worse. I moved out of that house a month later. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something terrible. I kept asking myself, what if I hadn't gone for that glass of water? What if I'd waited another 5 minutes? Would I still be here? I don't know, but I'll never forget the night the intruder came from the garage. It wasn't supposed to be anything extraordinary, just a typical road trip down the California coast. I had been in Santa Barbara visiting my grandmother, and now I was heading back to school in Los Angeles. The drive was longer than expected. The highway stretched out ahead of me, a ribbon of pavement that seemed endless. The sky had long since darkened into a deep, inky black, and I hadn't seen another car in what felt like forever. I was tired, so tired. The kind of exhaustion that weighs you down, makes you lose track of time. It had been hours since I last saw a gas station or any signs of life. My eyes were heavy, and the road ahead was beginning to blur. I realized that if I didn't stop soon, I'd fall asleep at the wheel. That's when I saw it. A small, rundown motel just off the highway. It had the kind of vibe that made you feel like you'd stumbled into an old B-grade horror film. The parking lot was almost completely empty. A single, dusty car was parked under the flickering lights, but no one was around. I pulled in, hoping it wouldn't be a total dump. As I stepped out of my car, I noticed the air was thick with the smell of diesel from the nearby freeway. The breeze was cool. The parking lot was gravel, cracked in places with weeds growing through the gaps, and the distant hum of trucks passing on the highway added a kind of low, persistent background noise. The faint glow from the motel's neon sign flickered, casting an almost sickly light over the scene. I walked into the small front office where the smell of stale cigarettes hit me like a wave. The woman behind the counter looked up, her face wrinkled with age, but her smile was kind. "Checking in, sweetie?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "Yeah, just for the night," I said, trying to sound casual, but the exhaustion was seeping into my voice. She nodded and shuffled behind the counter, picking up a key with a small plastic tag that read 12 in faded black numbers. The key was old enough that it had a certain weight to it, like it had been used thousands of times. "Room 12 is right down the hall," she said, handing me the key. Her eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than usual, but I didn't think much of it. I thanked her and walked back to the parking lot, feeling the chill of the night air against my skin. The parking lot was quiet, almost too quiet, but I just needed to sleep. I wasn't looking for anything special. I just wanted to shut my eyes and get some rest before hitting the road again the next morning. Room 12 was down at the far end of the building. The exterior of the motel looked even worse up close. Peeling paint, rust on the handrails, cracked windows. I tried not to focus on it too much as I unlocked the door to my room. It creaked open slowly, like it hadn't been used in a while, and I stepped inside. The room was small, but not terrible. A bed with a threadbare blanket, a dresser with a mirror that had seen better days, and a tiny bathroom that smelled like cleaning products. Strong, but unpleasant. The window was slightly cracked open, and I could hear the distant rush of traffic outside. The air inside felt stale, like it had been locked up for too long. I immediately noticed the door lock. It didn't seem to catch properly unless you really pulled on it. I gave it a tug, hearing the mechanism click into place, but I didn't trust it. I grabbed the nearby chair and wedged it under the doorknob just to be safe. It was a habit of mine ever since I started traveling alone. After that, I collapsed onto the bed, feeling the springs creak beneath me as I sunk into the mattress. My body ached, and the exhaustion from the drive weighed me down like a lead blanket. I didn't bother pulling the covers up. I just closed my eyes and let the quiet envelop me. The wind outside howled faintly, but it didn't bother me. I was too tired to care. The darkness of the night stretched on, and I fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. But it didn't last long. I woke suddenly to a faint creaking noise. It wasn't the wind, it was too deliberate. I blinked, disoriented, the darkness around me so thick I could barely make out anything. The soft hum of trucks outside had faded, and the room felt unnervingly still. I strained my ears, listening. The creak came again, this time louder. My heart skipped a beat. The door, it was opening. The door crept open further, and I could just make out a figure, a tall, thin shape, dark against the dim light from the hallway. It moved with an eerie, unnatural stillness, like it was trying to be quiet, but I could hear the soft sound of breathing. The figure, whoever he was, stopped just inside the room. I held my breath, hoping somehow he wouldn't notice me, but I knew it was too late. The silence between us was suffocating. Then my body acted on its own. I reached for the nearest thing I could grab, my eyes still locked on the figure in the doorway, and my hand brushed over a lamp. Without thinking, I grabbed it and hurled it toward the man. The lamp hit him square on the head with a sickening thud, the bulb shattering as it collided with his skull. The man groaned, stumbling backward, his face twisted in pain. He didn't fall, though. Instead, he swayed, almost like he was gathering himself, then straightened up, his gaze still fixed on me. In that moment, instinct took over. I jumped out of bed and bolted toward the door. My legs were shaky, my heart hammering in my chest, but I didn't stop. I grabbed the doorknob and yanked it open, slamming it behind me with everything I had. I quickly locked it from the outside. Foolish, maybe, but it was all I could do. I didn't hesitate. I ran straight to the front office, panic rising in my throat. I pounded on the glass door, my hands trembling, desperate for help. The woman behind the counter startled, rushing to open the door. Her eyes widened when she saw the fear on my face. "There's someone in my room," I shouted, barely able to breathe. "Call the police. Please, call 911. She didn't ask questions. Her face drained of color, and she hurried to the phone behind the desk. I tried to steady my breath, my heart still racing. Minutes later, though it felt like hours, the police arrived. They poured out of their squad cars, flashing lights cutting through the darkness. I told them everything, every detail I could remember. They rushed toward my room while I stayed with the officer at the front desk, trying to calm down. The officers returned minutes later, their faces grim. "The room's empty," one of them said, shaking his head. "There's no one in there." "What do you mean, empty?" I asked, confused. "He was in there. I saw him. He was standing right in front of me." The officer didn't answer right away. He pointed toward the window. I followed his gaze. The window, it was shattered. The glass scattered across the floor in jagged pieces. Blood stained the sill. "We think he crawled out through there," the officer said, his voice steady. My stomach dropped. They started searching the outside of the motel, and a few minutes later, one of the officers called out. "Footprints," he said, his voice tight. "They lead away from the room, into the field." They followed the muddy footprints into the tall grass behind the motel, but after a few yards, the tracks became vague, and they lost their way. As one of the officers spoke into his radio, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. "We've been looking for him for days," the officer muttered to his partner. "He's wanted for multiple break-ins and violent assaults along this stretch of highway. He's been casing motels, preying on people." A cold chill ran down my spine. The man wasn't just some random creep. He was dangerous, and I had nearly been his next victim. As the police left, I stood outside, my hands shaking, thinking, I'm never staying at a place like that again. Not ever. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the Vault awaits your return.